Most women don't realize the moment it happens, when they become unforgettable. Not to his heart, not to his soul, but to his ego. And that is a far more dangerous place to live, because when a man's heart forgets you, he can move on, but when his ego cannot, he is haunted. What does it mean to haunt a man's ego? It means you've become the mirror he can't break, the reflection that won't blur. You've triggered something primal, not his love, not his lust, but the invisible architecture of his identity. The woman he forgets is the one he conquered, the one who stayed too long, the one who needed him to see her, validate her, rescue her. But the woman his ego can't forget. She's the one he couldn't consume. She's the one who didn't flinch, the one who mirrored his shadow back to him with grace, and then walked away. Carl Jung knew this truth intimately. In every man's psyche lives the anima, the inner feminine, the unconscious symbol of emotional life, creativity, and spiritual depth. Most men do not know her. They only project her onto you, onto your softness, your smile, your silence. And when you walk into his world carrying the weight of your own awareness, you do not become the fantasy. You become the reckoning. He expects affection. You offer insight. He reaches for dominance. You respond with poise. He wants possession. You give presence and nothing more. And this confuses him, because he was not taught how to handle a woman who does not orbit his validation. A woman who knows her shadows and doesn't ask him to fix them. A woman who doesn't perform for his applause or shrink for his comfort. You don't soothe the wound, you reveal it. Not through cruelty, but through clarity. You see, a man's ego is built on illusion, of control, of conquest, of certainty. But the truly feminine woman, the one who has met herself in the underworld, speaks in riddles he cannot solve. She speaks the language of the soul, not to manipulate, but to awaken. And if he is unready, it terrifies him, because now he is no longer in control of the narrative. You are not reacting. You are not pleading. You are not proving. You are simply being. And that being shatters every performance he's relied on. So he'll remember you, not as the most beautiful, not as the most obedient, but as the one who knew. You knew when to be soft and when to be steel. You knew how to let him taste your presence without giving him the recipe. You knew when his words were shields, not truth. You knew when his desire was projection, not love, and you chose to remain whole. Most women fall into roles: the pleaser, the healer, the dream. They shape themselves into what the man needs to believe about himself. But the woman who cannot be forgotten? She refuses the role. She plays no part in his fantasy. She exists outside his script. And in doing so, she breaks the cycle. There's something untamed about her. Not wild in volume, wild in stillness. She doesn't chase. She doesn't entertain chaos. She doesn't explain her worth in long paragraphs. Her presence is her statement. She doesn't demand loyalty. She evokes it, not from begging, but from the sheer gravitational pull of her integrity. She knows her absence has weight, and if he tries to replace her with noise, he'll find nothing but echoes. And here is the paradox. She may love deeply. She may ache in silence. She may weep when no one is watching, but she never bleeds at the feet of someone who cannot tend to his own wounds. She does not mother his boyhood. She does not validate his control. She honors his manhood only when he has earned the right to stand in hers. And that's the cut his ego cannot heal from. Because while his conscious mind may chase novelty, his unconscious will return, again and again, to the woman who saw him. Not the version he paraded, but the one he buried. The one hiding behind the charm, the success, the need to win. You didn't need him to crumble. You simply didn't collapse. This is what it means to haunt a man's ego. You are the silence after the storm he created. You are the gaze that didn't waver. You are the threshold between what he is and what he fears becoming. He may not say it aloud. In fact, he likely won't, because to admit your impact would be to acknowledge that his power over women is conditional, and you were the condition he couldn't control. And yet, the memory of you lingers not in his fantasies, but in his discomfort. In the quiet moments when the mask slips. When he looks at another woman and sees only compliance where once there was confrontation. When he reaches for admiration but cannot find the spark of challenge. When he senses that something is missing, not because she isn't enough, but because you were too much in all the right ways. You didn't flatter his greatness. You questioned its foundation. You didn't reject his desire. You reflected its intention. You didn't mock his wounds. You made them visible. This is the woman who embodies the sacred disruptor, the archetype Jung never named but always pointed to. She carries the storm within her but walks as still water. She does not scream her boundaries. They are written in the way she carries herself, in the way she withdraws, not as punishment, but as prophecy. For the woman who sees a man's shadow becomes a test he cannot cheat. And make no mistake, the ego will fight. He may diminish her, dismiss her, call her cold, confusing, too much. But the truth is this: what he cannot label, he cannot claim. And what he cannot claim, he cannot forget. Because she touched a part of him no other woman dared to go near, the unformed, the unhealed, the unseen. And though he may pretend otherwise, he knows, somewhere beneath his projections, that she was not a threat, but a mirror. Not a wound, but an invitation. An invitation to evolve beyond the man he thought he had to be. But not all men accept that invitation. Some retreat, back into ego, into ease, into illusions of power. They choose women who mirror their persona, not their potential. Women who confirm the mask, not challenge the man beneath it. And that is where you must understand the difference between impact and involvement. To impact a man deeply does not require that you remain in his life. In fact, your departure may be the very thing that cements your presence in his unconscious. The woman who is unforgettable is rarely the one who stays through his avoidance, his immaturity, his half-love. She is the one who walks when it's clear he won't meet her on the path of truth. Not angrily, not dramatically, but with the quiet conviction of a woman who has already faced herself. Because that is the great task, to face your own shadows first. If you want to become the woman who his ego cannot forget, you must begin where he cannot follow, in the depths of your own unconscious. You must meet the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. The rage, the longing, the grief, the power. You must hold them without shame, transmute them without apology. You must stop trying to be likable and start being real, and in that truth you become magnetic, not to his fantasies, but to his deepest hunger, to be seen, to be known, to be met. Not every man is worthy of that meeting, and that's the part most women avoid. Because it's easier to be chosen than to choose, easier to be adored than to be alone. But once you've tasted your own power, not performative power, not seductive, manipulation, but grounded, sovereign presence, you can no longer pretend to be small. You do not need to raise your voice to be heard. You do not need to reveal your heart to prove it exists. You do not need to stay to make a point. The woman who can leave without fear is the woman he cannot replace. And what does that do to the ego? It splits it, because now he has seen something real, not perfect, not tame, but whole, something his performance could not earn, only recognize, something that asked nothing of him but truth. And if he is not ready to live in truth, then he will live in longing, longing for what he cannot recreate, longing for the woman who didn't just flirt with his light, she illuminated his shadow. You didn't fall into his story. you disrupted it. And now he tells it in silence, every time he meets someone new and searches for the reflection he lost in you. There's a sacred cruelty in awakening someone to their own soul before they're ready to meet it. And yet, that is what the unforgettable woman does. Not through intention, but through essence. Her very being destabilizes the illusion. She doesn't beg to be understood, because she is already deeply rooted in her own understanding. She doesn't fear rejection, because her worth was never built on being wanted. She has died many times, to her need for approval, to the fantasy of romantic salvation, to the performance of being the good woman. And in that death, she was reborn into clarity. Clarity is a threat to the ego, because ego survives on confusion, on masks, on roles performed unconsciously. But clarity pierces, and a woman who sees clearly, without judgment, without need, becomes unforgettable precisely because she is unrepeatable. You cannot replicate a woman who mirrors your soul. You can replace beauty. You can replace charm. You can replace obedience. But you cannot replace the stillness of someone who knows you without ever needing to have you. This knowing terrifies the man, who is still fragmented, still driven by conquest, by the need to be seen as strong rather than to be strong. Because when he meets a woman who doesn't validate the mask, when she looks through it, past it, beneath it, he is forced into confrontation with himself. And here's the paradox. He may never admit it, but he will carry it. In his body, in his psyche. In the silent comparisons he makes when he speaks to other women who don't challenge his unconscious roles. He may even resent you for it, not because you harmed him, but because you dared to reveal the hollowness behind his persona. And yet, that resentment will never erase the imprint. It will only deepen it. Because what leaves a man haunted is not your perfection. It's your refusal to make yourself small for his comfort. He remembers the woman who did not collapse when he pulled away. The woman who didn't need to explain her silence. The woman who didn't argue because her absence was the argument. The woman who didn't feed his avoidance but instead confronted it without raising her voice. And that confrontation, that calm dismantling of his facade, becomes a loop in his unconscious he cannot close. Jung understood that every man carries a wound, and that wound is often mothered by compliant women and exposed by conscious ones. A compliant woman reinforces his illusion of control, but a conscious woman, she exposes the boy still trying to be a man. And when she refuses to mother him, when she demands authentic masculinity, not dominance, but depth, he either rises or runs. The woman who cannot be forgotten never lowers her gaze to make a man feel taller. She sees him for what he is, and for what he could become. And if he cannot walk that path, she doesn't wait at the threshold. She closes the door, lovingly, completely, and in that act she becomes sacred in his psyche, not because she left scars, but because she left space, space that no performance can fill, space that echoes his missed transformation. She didn't need revenge, she didn't gossip, she didn't play games, she simply lived her truth, fully, unapologetically, with grace sharper than any blade. And if he ever tries to return, to reclaim what he abandoned, he finds only reflection. She hasn't waited, she hasn't paused. She has become someone even he no longer deserves access to. Because her love wasn't an offering, it was an initiation, and he chose comfort over initiation. He may spend years looking for pieces of you in others, in smiles that don't see, in bodies that don't feel, in souls that don't speak the language of depth. But he will not find you again, because you were never just a woman. You were the turning point. He remembers you, not because you stayed, but because you refused to settle. You were not the ending. You were the mirror before the chapter he never had the courage to write. There is a silence that follows the departure of a woman who refused to be consumed. And it is deafening to the ego. Not the dramatic silence of punishment or manipulation, but the kind of silence that speaks. I saw you, and I chose not to stay blind. That silence haunts, because it is not filled with pleas, not woven with regret. It carries only the echo of self-respect, something no man can erase from his memory, no matter how far he runs into distraction. She didn't chase. She didn't need to, because she knew. The woman who walks away from half-love is the one who walks in full truth. And that truth has a gravity to it, a force, a pull. It bends memory around it. Even as he buries himself in new stories, he cannot overwrite the page where she appeared. Not because she needed to be remembered, but because she couldn't be denied. This woman, the one who leaves when others cling, operates by different laws. She does not engage in war with the masculine. She does not try to wound or win. Her game is not seduction, it's awakening. And awakening is not a game at all. It is a fracture, a crack in the dream where the light gets in, a glimpse into the man he could become if he were willing to break his own illusion. The unforgettable woman is not perfect. She is not without flaws or pain or longing, but she has alchemized them. She has done the inner labor that most avoid. She has walked through her own darkness and come out unashamed. She does not need to be completed. She is not a half waiting to be filled. And when a man meets a woman who has nothing to prove, nothing to fix, and nothing to gain by being desired, he either expands to meet her, or he diminishes in her absence. And this too is a lesson the ego cannot swallow, that she did not need him to feel whole, that her life continued, blossomed, that her peace was not dependent on his return, that the love she gave was not bait, but blessing, and he failed to rise to it. You see, the woman he forgets is often the one who overextends, the one who pleads for understanding, the one who explains herself endlessly, hoping to be seen. But the woman his ego cannot forget. She speaks once, maybe twice, and then lets her absence speak volumes. Because she knows, if she has to scream to be heard, she is in the wrong room. And so she leaves. Not to be missed, but to be free. And in that freedom, she becomes legendary. Not because she intended to be, but because there are so few like her. So few who do not bend. So few who will not exchange soul for safety. So few who can hold space without shrinking themselves into it. She is rare, and rarity rewires the memory. Every man who encounters her, even briefly, will be touched by the vibration of her integrity. It will stay in his bones, even if he never admits it. Because it's not her beauty that lingers. It's not her body. It's not her words. It's the feeling of being seen and still held to a higher standard. She didn't love him as he was. She loved the version of him buried beneath the performance. And that is a love so radical, so confronting, that it either transforms or terrifies. This is why she becomes unforgettable. Not because she fulfilled a fantasy, but because she destroyed it, and offered something real in its place. Not comfort, not ease, but evolution. But evolution demands courage, and courage is rare. So most run, and when they run, they carry her in their shadows. She becomes the voice in the silence, the memory that makes mediocrity unbearable, the invisible measure against which all future encounters are weighed. Not because she was better, but because she was true. She wasn't pretending. She didn't manipulate. She didn't flatter. She simply was. And that being, that rare, untamed, self-sourced being, is the ache he cannot name. He may go on to love others. He may build a life, a family, a kingdom of his own design, but the imprint of her will remain in places he does not speak of, in the way his breath catches when someone dares to disagree with softness, in the ache behind his eyes when a woman touches his hand but not his soul. in the flicker of shame when he remembers the one who asked for truth, and he offered charm instead. You see, the ego wants power, but the soul craves recognition, and recognition can only happen in the presence of someone who does not distort her gaze to flatter you. She sees, and in that seeing you are revealed, not because she exposes you, but because she does not flinch when the mask slips. That is the rarest kind of intimacy, the kind that witnesses without possession. The unforgettable woman does not barter for belonging. She belongs to herself, and in doing so she calls others to do the same. That is her gift, and her threat, because her very presence forces the question, who are you when no one is applauding? Who are you when nothing needs to be earned? Who are you when you are no longer performing? Few can answer, but those who can, rise, and those who cannot, retreat. They tell themselves stories. She was cold, complicated, too hard to love. They make myths of her mystery so they don't have to admit the truth, that she loved them with her eyes open, that she held up the mirror and didn't look away, that she did not betray them, but she refused to betray herself, because she had already done that once, long ago, before the awakening, before the reckoning. She had knelt at the altar of his ego. She had made herself small, digestible, pleasing, and it nearly killed her spirit. But she rose, not with vengeance, not with armor, but with awareness. And that awareness is what he cannot forget. For it's one thing to lose a lover, it's another to lose a witness. A woman who saw you and did not shrink. A woman who loved you, not for who you pretended to be, but for the man you could have become. He will miss that, not because he is broken, but because he wasn't ready, and maybe he never will be. Maybe he'll spend years building comfort around the space she once filled, but every so often, when the night is still and the rolls fall away, he will remember. Not just her face or her voice, but her presence, the steadiness, the silence, the sovereignty, and in that remembering, he will ache, not just for her, but for the version of himself he abandoned to keep his ego intact, because she was not just a woman. She was a mirror, not a mirror of what he was, but of what he was meant to become. And in walking away, she did not leave a wound. She left a doorway, one he may never have the courage to walk through, but it remains, unclosed, unclaimed, unforgotten, because the woman who knows her worth does not wait. She does not explain. She does not return. She chooses. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.